Mesopotamia means the land between the waters, that is, the land through which the Tigris and Euphrates rivers flow, the biblical land of Shinar, modern Iraq. Here's a map of the ancient Near East. On the right side to the east are the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. That's the area of Mesopotamia. Just to the east of those rivers is the area of modern Iran, which in ancient times at one point is known as Persia. To the northwest is Anatolia, which is now modern Turkey, and on its coast you see the famous city of Troy, and from New Testament times Ephesus, from Neolithic times Çatalhöyük. To the south, where you see Alexandria and Giza and Memphis, that is Egypt. And then near the middle, the area of modern Israel, Palestine, and Lebanon. In fact, this map gives the borders for the modern nations, but these are all ancient sites. The next two slides give a timeline for Mesopotamia, and these slides cover the more prominent kingdoms of that area. One of the great innovations of the Western Semites was the invention of the alphabet. On this slide I have three alphabets. The first is most of the alphabet we use. We call these Latin letters. Below that row is the Greek equivalent for each letter, and below that is the Hebrew equivalent for each letter, if there is an equivalent. I've tried to line them up as close as I can. Please note that the Hebrew alphabet is actually written backwards. It should run from right to left, but in order to line things up, I have it going the direction of the Greek and Latin alphabets. Below these are the names of the letters. And if you look at the Hebrew letter Aleph, you'll see below it the Greek word Alpha, and the Hebrew letter Bet or Beth, you'll see Beta in Greek, Gimel and Gamma, and Dalet and Delta. It is obvious that someone has gotten the alphabet from someone else, and we know that the Greeks have gotten it from the Phoenicians, and as I've noted earlier, the Phoenicians are closely related to the Hebrews. In fact, Alpha and Beta and Gamma and Delta have no Greek meaning other than the names of letters, whereas in Hebrew, Aleph means ox, Beit or Beth means house, such as Bethel, house of God, Bethlehem, house of bread. Gimel is camel, and Dalet is door. So in Hebrew, the letter names actually come from particular objects, whereas in Greek, they have merely taken those names from the Phoenicians.
This is a chart based on a chart in my book that notes a number of Eastern churches, including those in the Middle East, and how they may or may not be related to certain well-known churches in the West. We know the Roman Catholic Church. There are certain churches, as you can see, in the West Syrian and East Syrian tradition that are in communion with the Roman Catholic Church. There is the Orthodox Church, which includes the Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox churches. There are those churches that at some point separated themselves from the main churches, the Western Roman Catholic Church or the Eastern Greek Orthodox Church, such as the Assyrian Church of the East, and then the Coptic Church in Egypt. There has been in recent years, at least on the part of the Roman Catholics, to reach out and try to make reconciliation with some of these Middle Eastern churches. Islam began among the Arabs, and even the Quran is only fully accepted in its Arabic language original. So this slide looks at the background, historical background of certain Arab groups. The Arabs trace their lineage back to the Ishmaelites. And Ishmael was one of the sons of Abraham. A number of the groups who made up the ancient Arabs are known as the children of the East, as they are called in Judges 6:3. Although there are a number of ancient settlements in the southern Arabian Peninsula area, the language, Arabic, is widespread in inscriptions around the Near East. They appear in the historical record in 853 BC as fighting against the Assyrians, and they are known for their camel-riding nomadic traders and raiders. There were other settlements closer to modern Israel and Syria, and even Paul early on ministered among the Arabs. The founder of Islam is Muhammad the Prophet, who is of a certain tribe in Mecca on the Arabian Peninsula. Muhammad is certainly one of the most important figures in world history. When I was in college, I recall I would read a few books out of the library that covered the great historical figures. And usually the top five were, of course, Jesus and Paul and Luther, Sir Isaac Newton, and also Muhammad. He was a foundational religious leader and a great organizer of people. Now we saw that the Buddha was an historical figure, but somewhat shrouded in legend. Hinduism has no official founder. So here we arrive at a religion that really we know about the historical founder. He was not a miracle worker. That's what he was not known for. But he had a message, and his message was understood as affirmed in early military victories. He was born in Mecca to a prominent family, and his first wife was Khadijah. And while she was alive, he had a monogamous relationship with her. He began proclaiming his message around AD 610. He was receiving visitations from the angel Gabriel, according to his testimony. The message was to abandon idolatry and to worship Allah, who is the only God, to repent of sin, to be honest in business, and to treat women and children, including orphans, better. But he went from a mere religious reformer to the founder of a religion. Of course, when somebody presents something so radical and new, there's going to be those who refuse it. So he experienced initial resistance from those in Mecca. He was espousing a faith that chose religious brotherhood instead of tribal identity for the foundation of society. Writes Lippmann, the Brotherhood of Islam, the Ummah or community of believers, has existed ever since in a bond of faith that transcends race and politics. The believers, says the Quran, are a band of brothers. 10 years later, in 620, he experienced a night journey wherein he was supernaturally taken to Jerusalem and then ascended to heaven. Of course, some scholars will say that this was more visionary than physical in nature. But I note here that even the Apostle Paul experienced a visionary trip to heaven. So this is not necessarily an odd claim. It is a supernatural claim. But I give you there Paul's own account of his experience in 2 Corinthians. In 622, because of rejection, Muhammad and others made a famous flight from Mecca to Yathrib, and this is the occasion of the beginning of the Arab calendar. This flight is known as the Hijra. Yathrib itself was renamed Medina, that is, the city of the Prophet. And there, Muhammad was allowed to carry on with his reforms because the political environment was less restrictive. In 624 is the Battle of Badr, which occurred on the road from Medina to Mecca, wherein those who followed Muhammad attacked a Meccan caravan. And it was an overwhelming victory for the Muslim side, and thus was seen as something affirming the message. Then a few years later was the Battle of the Trench at Medina, wherein the Meccans attacked, but were not victorious, and they withdrew. And thus a treaty was made between the followers of Muhammad and Mecca in 628. Lippmann notes that a Medina Jewish tribe who had sided with the invading Meccans, and remember, Mecca is against Muhammad at this time, were treated severely for backing the Meccans. Quote, all the men, 600 to 800 in number, were beheaded. The women and children were sold into slavery. It should be noted that the treatment of the Jewish people in this case was not typical of Islam. But one does note in reading the literature that there was this tension beginning with Muhammad of appreciating the Hebrew writings, but being very critical at times of the Jewish people. The expansion of Islam is truly amazing historically. Sir Norman Anderson writes, quote, the early expansion of Islam is one of the outstanding phenomena of history. Within 10 years of the death of its founder, Muhammad, Muslim armies had burst out of Arabia and conquered the countries we now know as Jordan, Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Egypt. Within 100 years of his death, they had swept across North Africa, conquered Spain, and penetrated southern France. And during the same period, they had swept east through Central Asia, poured into northern India, reached the confines of China, and built up an empire wider than that of Rome at her zenith. I note here the famous battle of Yarmouk, which took place in Syria in 636 AD, considered one of the great military massacres of antiquity, and they defeated the Byzantine army. That is the army, you can call it perhaps the Christian army of the Byzantine Empire based at Constantinople. It should be noted that conversions were not instantaneous when peoples were conquered, at the larger population level anyway. In the West, Muslim expansion was finally stopped in 732 at the Battle of Tours in what would be today France, wherein the Muslims were defeated by Charles Martel, literally Charles the Hammer, the Frank, who was the grandfather of the even more famous Charlemagne. The next two slides cover significant events and dynasties of Arab Islamic history. Now, Islam means submission, and a Muslim is someone who has submitted to Allah. Again, it begins among the Arabs of the Arabian Peninsula, and they trace their origins back to Abraham, just as the Jewish people do. These early Arabs are Bedouin, but they're also urban Arabs. Arabic is the key language, and it is one of the Semitic languages, so it is related to Hebrew and Akkadian. And it must be kept in mind historically that early Islam is to some degree an Arab movement. And it was founded at the time that there were Jewish and Christian communities in the Middle East. Thus, it is old, but it is not ancient. Christianity is even older than Islam. There are two central beliefs of Islam. This is known as the kalima, or the affirmation of faith. Simply put, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of God.